Hi everybody, welcome. I'm Irene Johnson. I'm with the Collier County Public Library, and today I'm joined by my guest,
Denise McMahon from the South Regional Library.
And we're going to be discussing a great book today. It's called The Paris Library, and it is by Janet, I cannot say her middle name, Skeslien Charles. And this is her second novel that she's written. She's an award-winning author of Moonlight in Odessa before this particular book. And now she has written this one. It has been published in 10 different languages. So it's a pretty interesting book, and it's been all around the world. One of the things that I found the most interesting about this author is she actually is from Montana, which is the setting in the book. And she was a program manager at the Paris Library, the American Library in Paris. So she actually has physical experience with both the settings that she picked. So it was a very interesting book. It was interesting to read her bio, and you definitely can get the flavor for that as you read the book because it's very dynamic and it really gets into the details that if you physically hadn't been there themselves, you would never know.
Right. I think you can really, you feel it, you feel her love for Paris. You can feel that she's really lived in Montana. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
So we're really excited to get started. This is a book that is, we would consider a historical fiction. I would say maybe family saga as well.
Yes.
The genre. And it's basically has its protagonist, which is Odile, and she's going to be our main character in the story. And then we have another character in the story, Lily, that we're going to talk about in detail, who is from Montana, and we'll discuss her. But basically, the purpose of this story is that there's a young girl in love with Paris for the first time, becoming a librarian. And it's how this is impacted by World War II. And we're going to kind of go from there and discuss. We will have spoilers in this discussion, so if you haven't read the book yet, you might want to listen to us after you read.
Definitely.
All right, so we'll start with question number 1.
Sounds good. Okay. So question number 1. Okay, do you want to go ahead and read it?
Sure. On a Goodreads scale of 1 to 5 stars, 5 being the best, what would you rate Paris Library, and what's your reasons?
Okay. I would rate the Paris Library as a 4. I really wouldn't rate it as a 5. I'd rate it as a 4. I like the characters. It is a love story. There's a lot of things that are going on in this story. It's a story about betrayal. It's a story of coming of age. It is a story of Paris during the war and all of the things that war does to a community, to people. And it's really a story of why books were so important during this time.
Absolutely. And I think it reflects also on why books are so important during any time.
Yes, absolutely.
I rated it a 3.5. I found the pacing in the book to be a little slow. So when you first pick up the book, you kind of have to get through 2-3 chapters before you really get involved and feel like you want to continue. And then at the very end, she puts a lot into 2-3 chapters.
Yeah.
So I felt like her pacing was a little off, so it kind of didn't flow as well as maybe a book that I'd give a full 4 stars to. But the character development in the book was well done.
Yeah, I think it was well written. I think that what I really liked about it is that you did learn a lot about the actual library, which I didn't know a lot about, so I did enjoy that.
Her love of the Dewey Decimal System in the very beginning of the novel is probably one of my favorite parts of the book. And it's like every time she would be thinking things, they'd be like, oh, that's 820.2, and that's food, and this is, 726, it's about animals. And she just reflected all those in her mind. And being, of course, working in the library, I found that really enticing.
The other thing that I really loved about the book is that she referenced throughout this entire book so many other novels.
Yes.
And she was quoting them, and so I really had to not stop reading to go get that other book and make sure that she was referencing it correctly.
Absolutely.
So I did love that.
I think one of the book kits that I found for this novel actually had a list, and it was like 20 novels that were referenced in this book. One of them I remember being On Mice and Men.
Yes.
That was her brother's favorite.
Watching God.
The Eyes Were Watching God. So there was a lot of great library aspects to this book.
Definitely.
Which is called the Paris Library. So she did a very good job with that.
She did.
So I'm going to move on. I'm going to have Denise ask me question number 2.
Okay. Many historical fiction stories adopt a dual timeline. Were you engaged in one timeline over the other? And if so, why?
So there are 2 timelines in this book. we talked a little bit about the settings in the beginning when I was discussing the author. There's Montana, that's in 1983, and that's with Lily, and she's with the protagonist, which is Odile, and it's at the end of her life when she's an older woman. And then there's a flashback, the main timeline, which is Paris in 1939, and it's when she's a young girl, basically on the cusp of falling in love for the first time and being a librarian, having her first job, kind of stepping outside of her parents' influence in some ways, and it's a really exciting time. My hard time with this is that one storyline was by far better than the other one.
I agree. I thought that Odile's storyline was more engaging, and for me, what happened is that I was really having to read Lily's timeline. Well, I was trying to race through Lily's timeline because I really wanted to find out what was going on with Odile, what was going on with the war, how was her life evolving. So I found it really, really hard to give Lily's timeline enough time to really digest it.
It was very basic timeline, almost bland in some ways compared to the first timeline. And we almost said when we were discussing this earlier, you could have done away with the two timelines and just brought the Lily's story in at the very end of her life and done just a chronological story of Odile.
Yeah.
And I think that would have worked, I think, almost better.
Yeah, because I found myself not really invested in Lily, and I was just going through the motions of trying to read to make sure I wasn't missing anything important. But it was about a teenager who's growing up in 1983. She has all of the typical things. You know, she's going through, being a teenager, being selfish, being jealous, first boyfriends, and I mean, it really, there wasn't anything in her timeline that really grabbed me until we get to the part where her mom is ill. And then that is the only part of the story that I would say kind of like tugged on me and got me interested to then find out, okay, what is going to happen with her mom and then how that's going to affect her.
I agree. I think as we moved forward through the book, you got to know Lily better. However, even the more you learned about her as a character, I didn't love her. I never really grew fond of her. In fact, in some ways, like you said, she was kind of a little snob.
She was selfish. She was just jealous. All of the things, again, that a lot of teenagers go through. So I really didn't like her because she was being a little bit, selfish and self-centered.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about question number 3.
Okay.
Why was it important for the librarians to continue to spread the love of reading during the war? And this is, I love this question.
This is a really important question, and I think this is important during the war and during any time. I feel that books, really, the whole novel was about the power of books and the power that books have to help us feel hope, bring joy to our lives. And during the war, they sent books out to so many of the soldiers so that they could escape from what was actually going on right then and there, the war. So momentarily, while they're reading this book, they're carried away so that they could be refreshed and then kind of get away from the war, what was going on, all of the despair that was going on, and have some hope and some cheer.
And that was really, in real life as well as in the novel, it was the mission of the library was to give books to everybody.
Yes.
Including the people that were in internment camps, including people who weren't allowed to have books anymore.
Right.
It was their goal to make sure that everybody could have a book in their hand and experience that. Because in a time when you were hungry and you were starving, and you didn't have any niceties, and the luxuries were gone, and there was no movies, and there was no dancing, and you had books.
Right, and that was a real part of the whole story for Odile and the people that worked at the library, how important it was for them to get books into the hands, especially of the people who were no longer allowed to come into the library because they were Jewish and they were not allowed to come in anymore. So they actually really risked their lives to get books into their hands, whether it was taking them to their private residences, making sure that they had that same kind of experience of enjoying the book that they had when they were able to come into the library.
I thought it was interesting too that it wasn't just the Jewish people, it was also anybody that was English.
Yes.
So if you were English and you were a sympathizer, you were considered an, basically had to go to an intern camp as well, and you were exempt from going to the library as well. Absolutely. Because you were basically fighting for the other side.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So again, for me, you know, books represented that tool, that refuge. And it also, again, I think what we were trying, the book is trying to say is that no matter how bad it gets, there will always be books to remind us that the world gets better and that we can make it through. And I think that's what they wanted to continue to spread by giving people books.
Hope.
Hope.
I think that was the big, you know, how do you have hope in a time that's this difficult?
Exactly. Okay. All right. Just discuss a few moments in the book that prompted strong emotional reactions from you. Why were these moments impactful? So what were some really impactful emotional reactions to the book?
So one of the ones that I found really difficult in the book was when her twin dies, Remy.
Yes.
In the book, Odile and Remy are like this.
They're twins?
They're twins, they're close-knit, they are each other's solace in so many ways. And they're so close, and when he decides to go and fight, he is taking Capuchin and ends up in an internment camp. And basically, he gets to the point where he dies. And when he finally dies, and this is a year or two later that he's been in that internment camp, the mother is beside herself.
Yeah, the mom just really spirals out and kind of is not able to cope with it. So she can't really be there as a wife, as a mother to Odile, and she's just kind of reclusive. So she's not able to offer her child, who is also missing the brother, any kind of comfort.
And you find Bitsy, who was his sweetheart, was devastated as well.
Yes.
And they really took her in as a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And, so she really had she didn't just lose Remy, she lost the family.
Yes.
She lost that connection to Odile and to her mom and to her father. And that was just that was a tough spot in the novel for me. I think that one invoked a lot of emotion.
Right. One of the emotional times for me too is when I was reading when Lily's mom did pass away.
Yes.
Here she is, she's a teenager. Her mom had been sick, and now she does not have that real strong connection with her dad. She doesn't really have anyone else to turn to. Unlike Odile, who has, at times in her life, she's had her twin.
Right.
So she's had someone in her life. Lily doesn't have anyone. She's got her friends, but again, they're all on the same team, learning and path. So that was very emotional. I think, was there another emotional part for you?
I think the other one that really got to me was the Crow letters. And the Crow letters in the novel were basically these letters, and they would be signed
anonymously.
Yes. And you basically could rat on anybody and be like, well, this person is a sympathizer with the Jews because they are providing books. Or this person is a sympathizer with this English gentleman. This woman is a Jew and she's writing a novel and causing, disregard and unrest. And a lot of the people that were subscribers to the library were outed through the Crow letters.
Yes, yeah.
And reading these letters is heart palpitating. It makes you angry and furious. It really gave me such a sense of disgust. It's one of the points of the book where it's very vivid about the hatred and what was really happening during the occupation of France.
And what was really hard for me was the fact that they're called Crow letters because they're anonymous. So anyone who had a beef with someone could write this letter, and then they would be investigated, and their lives could just be totally destroyed by some letter, because they were questioned, they were taken in. If they were assumed guilty, they were guilty.
Right.
So yeah, it was the fact that they were so anonymous and there was no consequence to the author of the letters.
But there was so much consequence to the poor person that was written about that they could end up in an internment camp or executed.
Absolutely.
So there was definitely some really strong emotional points of the book.
Okay. So number 5 is let's talk about the friendship between Odile and Lily. What did they both learn from each other, and what what was similar? What were some of the similar characteristics about them?
Well, I think the most similar characteristic about Odile and Lily is that they were both dangerously jealous.
Yes. Quick to get jealous, not quick to really think about, if they said something that was harsh, what the consequences would be, not only for them, but for the person. And I think that one of the other things that positive about both of them is they both really did love books. They love books. I think they both love languages. Lily was learning French from Odile, so I think they had some similar kinds of things. But yeah, the rage, the jealousy, always willing to say something quickly without thinking about the consequences.
And being naive about some very important things in life. I think they both were very naive about, again, what could be the consequences of your words,
right? What
could be the consequences of your writing, things that they just didn't think through, and then made really bad outcomes for people future in the book.
And I think that Odile, we see the consequences of what Odile does. And then I think throughout the book, what Odile is trying to do is to help Lily better navigate so that she's not making those same mistakes with the things that she's saying. She's trying to kind of like temper her a little bit, kind of give her some guidance.
Yes.
Not tell her what to do, but kind of help her get to a better way of handling a situation. So I think she's trying to, Lily was really inspired by Odile.
And I think Lily gave Odile something to live for.
Yes.
Something that brought some life back into her because of her youth, her vivaciousness, somebody wanting to know about Paris. What was it like? She got to experience retelling the story of the Paris Library, of her friends, of her co-workers, what was life, what was happening. And for Lily, in a time when you just lost your mom, now you have a stepmom, you have all these young kids that you're helping raise, it was a place for her to escape and have some time that was for her.
Yes, definitely. And I think that what we know from reading the book is that Odile so loved Paris. She so loved her language. She loved the library that she worked with. And so she's now removed totally from that and doesn't have any of those connections. So I agree. Lily kind of allows her to relive and talk about Paris that she loves and the places she so enjoyed working and the people.
Absolutely.
And Lily actually gets to learn a lot about people, relationships, cultures through Odile's stories.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about Remy earlier when we were talking about deep emotional things. What do you think was the rippling impact when Remy decided to join the French army?
I think Remy, being Odile's twin, was like her guiding light, her go-to person, her strength. If she had a problem, Remy could help her with it. If she was being a little too rash or too harsh or something, he could kind of help her see, things differently. And I think when he went away, she no longer had his guidance. She no longer had that support. So she was kind of left to navigate her world now without him as her moral kind of compass.
Absolutely. And with Remy leaving, the dynamic of her own family, because it used to be her and Remy against her parents in many ways.
Absolutely.
And Remy was kind of like, when she wanted to stretch beyond being just a woman who was a wife and had children and wanted to have a career and wanted to experience other things, he supported her.
Yes.
Where her dad was not favorable to it at all.
Because the dad wanted for her to be a woman, a young girl growing into womanhood, based on what his definition was.
Yes.
And she was wanting, just like, everyone who's growing up, they want to kind of pave their own way. And she didn't want to immediately go out in life and just get married and immediately start a family. She had a love for books and she wanted to work. And he didn't get that concept. And so Remy kind of helped her, not get discouraged and not lose sight of that dream.
Absolutely.
So he played a really important role in her life.
And of course, joining the army then in time leads to his internment and his death.
Yes.
And when, we talked about this a little bit earlier, when he dies, the mom and the dad and Odile and Betsy, all of them who are connected to Remy are all impacted greatly by his death with grief, and it's a turning point in the novel for how they're shaped and developed, even as a family unit.
Absolutely. Because they no longer again have that. Remy was more of a grounded, not quick judgment, snap judgment. He wasn't rash. Now there wasn't any of that balance in the family.
Okay. This is a tough one. Margaret is eventually attacked by Paul, and when Odile learns the truth, she leaves behind Paris forever to marry an American. What do you think of this decision by Odile, and to leave everything behind?
Well, for me, when I got to that part, I didn't think that it really resonated with the character that had been developed. I thought, this seems like a very rash decision. It doesn't seem in line with her as a character. She loved Paul. He did something that was awful in that he attacked her best friend. She loved her best friend dearly, and her best friend was hurt and didn't want to have anything to do with her, but to simply leave without saying anything to the family, without saying goodbye, without really having a plan, and to just go off, and after like 3 days of meeting this other gentleman, Buck, she runs off and marries him and moves to America. It just did not seem as though it would be, again, the right thing to do. For her, it just seemed like she was running away.
Because she left all of Paris
Everything.
behind. I mean, this truly was atrocious. I mean, when Margaret was attacked, she was attacked because she had a German lover. And during the war, she was with a German man. And when finally the Germans were leaving, and it was apparent that France was going to be liberated, the men in the area were going and finding these women who had taken German lovers, and they were viciously attacking them.
They were shaving their heads. That
Yes.
was one of the things that they did. And yes, many times they were beating them, and this happened to have happened to Margaret, who, yes, she did take a German lover. She was in a marriage with her husband who had basically abandoned her.
Absolutely.
And she found this German gentleman who had actually saved the lives of 4 people that she knew, because he could have taken them all in and had them, put into an internment camp. So they had this kind of like a bond together, and they were both hurting people. They were both in this war, but they didn't have any understanding. So they would gather up all of the women, and then they would shave their heads. What they didn't take into account is that Margaret had benefited from this relationship with this German officer, because they were able to get, during times of food rations, shortages, medical rations, she was able to get some of these things with his help, and then actually had sent them to Remy, who was in a camp. So Paul, who was the fiancé, did not take any of that into account, just lashed out violently towards her, which was, again, another thing I had a little bit of a problem with in the book. It was not characteristic of Paul's behavior.
No. He was much more thoughtful and much more, you do see some characteristics in that she was, in a lot of ways, naive, because you do see some characteristics of Paul that you realize you don't like.
Yes.
There's a part in the story where they finally want to be together and be physically together. And he basically finds this apartment so that they can go and have their way together. And the whole time, they're apartments of Jewish people who have been either put into internments or have been basically killed.
Right. And at no time does Odile think or ask the question, whose apartment is this?
Yes.
How can we be here? So that was the part of how naive she was.
Yes.
That kind of bothered me, because here she was taking books to people who could not leave their homes. She knew a little bit of what was going on, but never put that together.
And she responded to the crow letters. When she
Yes.
found the crow letters in her father's office, she grabs them and goes and destroys them. And again, you see how naive she is, because her father catches her doing it and says, I'm getting calls and people want to know why their letters aren't being responded to. Do you realize you're putting our entire family in danger?
Right.
So you think you're saving those people, but you're making it so that we could die because we're not doing what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
So it was different.
Yeah. She just did not have a real grasp of the consequences
Of what was
of
going on.
what was going on, and even her actions.
And maybe her rashness in some ways was very rash. I mean, she married Buck, and the whole time she was married to Buck, she was married to Paul.
Yes.
And she never was honest with him about that.
She never, yeah. What was lacking in the novel for me is understanding how she had grown or lived as a married woman in the United States all of these years. We know only just a fragment of things, like she had had a son, her son had died in Vietnam,
Yes.
but we kind of pick up in the novel that she is really a recluse.
Absolutely.
And Lily is the one who starts this kind of friendship with her. But we don't really understand why she did not in America really come into her own again. You know, yeah, bad things happened in the war, but she had found a buck, she had gotten married, she had had a child. She never seemed to be able to come to terms with what had gone wrong in her life with her friend Margaret and the war and Paul, and then deal with it and then come out on the other side. She kind of like hid it, never dealt with it.
Absolutely. Our last question is, do you think Odile will ever reconnect with Margaret again? Because at the end of the book, it leaves it very open, which for me, I don't particularly care for. I wanted an ending, but
yeah, I hope so. I mean, we see that there's an article that Lily actually sees that Odile has, and she reads it, and Margaret has become an actual artist. And we had also learned in the book that we feared that Margaret was going to lose her daughter because she had had an affair with this German soldier. So her husband, who had abandoned her basically, and who had had multiple torrid affairs, there was no consequence to him that there was to her. So we learned through this newspaper article that Margaret had gone on to have a fruitful life. She had her daughter was actually living with her. She had become an artist. So I'm hoping that you know, now Odile might have the strength to reach out and try to make contact with her, because one of the things that we hope that we all learn is that time does heal.
it does.
And you know, Odile was not responsible for what Paul did physically to Margaret. Yes, she had shared with her fiance, who had actually was her husband now, the fact that Margaret had taken a German lover, but she did not force Paul to beat her.
And didn't give any indication that she thought it was acceptable or appropriate in any shape or form.
Exactly, and left Paul immediately
After.
once she found out. So I'm hoping that she can go back and it's not too late, and I hope that they have both learned to forgive.
My ending for this story would be, instead of buying Lily one ticket to Paris, that she bought two, and she was going with her, and they were going to go to the Paris Library and just reconnect.
Yes.
That's what I would hope for this novel.
Yes. Well, I think that there was a lot that we shared. I think there's still a lot of points that we haven't even covered.
Absolutely. If you're interested in having a discussion about this book, we do have a Zoom meeting on Tuesday, November 21st at 2 p.m. You can sign up at collierlibrary.org, and then I will email you a link that you can attend, and we can do a virtual Zoom discussion, very similar to what we did here about the book. Thank you so much for everything today, and thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoyed our book discussion.